Okay, so welcome to the webinar. What we're going to look at today is just some of those common mistakes that people might make in Ed. So just a bit of background. Often our team gets sent content for review from people who are new to the platform. They want us to have a look over and see how their lessons are doing, what they could improve, that sort of thing. And what I have here is just some of those issues that pop up over and over again. And so this webinar might just help you turn up your lesson to reach its maximum potential. So what we have here is 4 key areas. So these are poor learning practices, issues with lesson media, perhaps some weaker interactive questions, and then just general formatting issues. So we're going to go straight in and look at poor learning practices. So what these generally are made up of, we can call the poor learning practices blunt compliance, ineffective reinforcement, and unengaging lessons. So we'll start with blunt compliance. Now, Ed is really, really great for educating on compliance training, getting learners to understand and agree with these compliance rules that they need to be aware of. But the thing is, often what we see is people will come in and they'll start the lesson like, you must adhere to your code of conduct, and they'll do a true or false question. It's mandatory, you need to comply. And this isn't really effective for getting those degree compliance. They've already signed the form, and they know that the company's position is that it's mandatory to adhere to policy. So answering that true or false question, they already know. We're not teaching them anything. It's like we're sitting there over the shoulder saying, you agree, don't you? You do agree. Look, you're expressing truth, so you have to agree. It's not doing anything. It's kind of, it puts a bit of a strain on the learner, I think. It wastes a bit of their time. What we think is a more effective way to genuinely encourage compliance to the rules is to try and convince your learner. Look at your lesson from their perspective. So what would really encourage them to agree with your rules? How would you how would they be convinced to comply? And what we find is the best way to do that is just to try and teach the learner about the benefits to them that would be conferred if they did comply to these laws. So, doing things like looking at what percentage increase there was in what percentage decrease there was in injuries when the new health and safety policy was introduced. This is where we're not just telling them you must adhere, we're telling them these are the benefits if you do adhere. Because I'm sure someone already told them you must adhere at the start, and again, it's kind of obvious that you need to adhere to the rules. So what we want to do here is use the time that we're taking away from our learners, when they're doing their jobs. We're taking that time away from them, and we want to use that effectively and get them to actually genuinely agree and enthusiastically agree that they will be complying with these laws. So to summarize, really make sure that when you're reviewing your lessons, just keep in mind their points of view. And if you're kind of in HR or educational compliance, just doing a true or false question, you must comply, is ineffective. So the next thing we're going to look at is ineffective reinforcement. So before we go into this, I just want to cover 2 types of reinforcement that you can conduct in Ed. So the first is just standard interactive reinforcement. And this is where you ask a question that's directly related to something introduced earlier in the lesson. So you can say, you introduce a concept like open questions are good for sales. And then later on in the lesson, it says which question type is good for sales, and it has one of the answers, open and closed questions. So you've directly told the learner the answer to this question, and you're just testing if they remember that, or you're giving them another chance to recall it. And then active learning, this is where you haven't directly given your learner the answer to the question, but you've given them the tools to figure out the answer. So this is it produces really good learning results when you give this kind of question. So you can also call this applied learning. So perhaps you've talked to your learner about the best ways to open a conversation with a customer, and then you put them in a chat template and you say, which do you think would be the best way to start this conversation? So it's really about getting, it's not just telling the learner the answer and then, getting them to select that answer from the list. It's about giving the learner the tools to answer that active learning question, and then when they're in the real situation, hopefully they'll have had a chance, or they'll have had practice at figuring out the correct answer, and they'll be able to do that in the real situation. So I tend to use almost all of my lessons are entirely active learning questions, unless there's a particularly difficult concept, and then I use interactive reinforcement. Something I see though, I guess that newcomers to the platform do is they'll do something like introduce a concept via knowledge transfer on one slide, and then immediately afterwards they'll do interactive reinforcement on that exact concept. The problem here is that the learner will have they'll have just read the statement that you're asking them the question about. Perhaps when you were creating the lesson, you had a really good idea for the question straight away after you've done that knowledge transfer. But you really need to. You can't put interactive reinforcement straight after introducing the concept. It's not even left the learner's short-term memory. It's not even been forgotten about. It's just all they have to do is continue thinking the words that they were thinking before they pressed go to the next slide. So it's an ineffective way to reinforce the content. There's no challenge, there's no thinking involved. It's kind of boring for the learner. So to make this more effective, what you can do is just spread out the content. Introduce some slides in between so that the learner doesn't have the concept top of mind when they're going through content. So they have to think a bit to answer their interactive reinforcement correctly. What you can also do, which is what I like to do, is introduce the concept and then use active learning. And you can do that active learning straight away after introducing the concept. So again, on that slide 2 there, you've given your learner the tools to figure out the answer to the question that comes on the next slide. So they still have to think, but the content is reinforced straight away. So either if you're using interactive reinforcement, just break it up so that the learner has to think, or use active learning, and you don't need to worry about breaking up the content because the question, I guess, in its character makes the learner think. So the final, poor learning practice that I see happening quite a lot is just kind of unengaging questions. So the first example we have here is where the learner's gone through, we've got 4 content templates in a row, and it's just a bit boring. As our learners are going through, they get a bit unengaged. It's just such a shame as well because, we have active learning as a way to introduce new concepts. And what this would do, if you use active learning, it makes the content more engaging for our learners because they're interacting rather than just reading. They are figuring out the answer to the question, so it puts their brains to work a bit harder, and it means that they will have to think a bit more, and that will encourage retention. And it just makes your lesson feel that much better. And because we have so many interactive templates available to complement the content templates, it means that you have access to so much more of the library, and you can make your lessons just that more engaging when you use those interactive questions instead of content templates. So if you do find yourself in a lesson where you've got 4 or more content templates in a row, just add in an interactive question in the middle, even just to keep it interesting, or you can try and change up one of the content templates for some active learning where the learner has to figure out the answer to the question. Other things to consider are large videos. Now, I know there are some things like there are fascinating TED Talks that are 10, 15 minutes long. If you are teaching your learner about that, then okay. But more often than not, we get kind of boring large videos. And again, our micro lessons are about being short, sharp, and succinct and getting to the point quickly so our learners can learn everything they need to and go back to the job. So keep in mind, if you have large videos, don't do that. I mean, with the YouTube template, you're able to specify when the video starts and ends. If you're uploading your own custom video, you'll be able to trim that video to just the section you want to use. So it's really that there's no excuse if you have these super long videos. You really want to try harder to just make sure that only the relevant content is there for your learner. So another thing in the lesson, entirely content templates, kind of similar to the 4 content templates in a row thing, but I have seen this quite a lot. Again, there's no excuse with the fact that you can introduce active learning to challenge your learners, getting to figure out answers, kind of getting them to showing them the answer rather than telling them. So that's really important. And lessons which are just content templates are so unengaging for our learners. It's a real shame when we see them. And also, the lesson uses the same template repeatedly. So multiple choice, very easy to configure. But unfortunately, I guess that draws people in a bit too much, and they want to use the multiple choice template over and over, or any other kind of template. And unfortunately, again, there's so much different interaction styles available that you really should be using all of them. So for instance, when I'm creating my lesson I make sure that I don't use the same template twice within a lesson, because I want to keep my learner having lots of different interaction styles with the content, and I recommend you do the same. So now we're going to look at issues with lesson media, and we're going to look at when content isn't optimized for web, and just general issues with the aesthetics of the lesson. So for those of you who I guess haven't really worked with delivering content over the web before, it's important to optimize your media for the web. So maybe you've experienced it that when you load up a website and the page is taking really long to load, or when you get there the images are just slowly loading in. Now that's because the web designer there hasn't taken the time to optimize their images for the web. And the same thing here, it's a good idea to think about the platform that you're using, the medium that you're delivering your lessons on. You're not in a classroom, you're delivering your learning content over the web, and as such, you need to adapt to that. So quite often we'll see that I go into a lesson and there's massive images that take ages to load, and for the best learning experience, we want our learners to see the images as soon as they come into the lesson. Similarly, videos, we stream our videos directly to learners' devices, and in cases where instructors and designers haven't optimized their videos for delivery over the web, then we can see issues with content taking ages to load, and again, it's just using up learners' time where we don't need to. So you want to keep your images to the right size. Now there are image size guidelines available online, so you can look those up for ed and for general web usage. But also what you can do is use certain programs. So I really recommend just having a Google and looking up how to optimize your media for the web. But I use programs like Image Optim. Is great for compressing your images without harming the quality of them. And what that does is it reduces the image to the smallest possible file size it can be at those dimensions. So that's really useful when you're uploading images. I make sure to run mine through that program. Every single image I upload to a lesson has to go through Image Optim before I will put it in my lesson. Another thing you can do, so for videos, I like to use a program called Miro Video Converter. And this, again, same thing, it will reduce the sizes of my videos by about 90%. But you can also do things like when you're creating your videos, you can optimize it for the web, but that will depend on the video editing platform you use, but there will be guides for that online. So do think about how your learners will be accessing your content when you are adding media to your lessons. So we're just going to look at aesthetics. You can see here, the leftmost image what we have is an example where imagery is not of a consistent size within a slide. It just looks really ugly. It doesn't take too long to go in and edit your images to be the same size. It can be done really simply in Photoshop or whatever program you're using. And I think even nowadays, most Windows and Apple operating systems allow you to edit image dimensions within the preview window. So again, it's something that would take 5 minutes to Google, and then your lessons will look so much nicer for your learners. And they don't want to be going through ugly lessons, if you know what I mean. It's just such a shame, because we get some lessons, they have nice imagery, but it just looks so untidy when the time isn't taken to make sure images are all the same size, even within a slide. Something else to consider is when there are a couple of templates that allow learners to tap and zoom in on an image. The image slide, scrolling media, multiple choice, that sort of thing. So where smaller images are uploaded, it's a bit of a disappointing experience for the learner, and they're thinking, well, why did we zoom in on this image just to get something so small? You might have happened upon this when you're on the web and you're looking on Google Images maybe, and you click in and the thumbnail it's the exact same size as the thumbnail. It's a bit disappointing. So do take the time, if you are using one of those templates that allows you to zoom in, just make sure your image is the appropriate size for that template. And finally, when you're uploading background imagery, make sure you go through your lesson. If you're not, I guess, a trained graphic designer or something like that, just make sure whenever you upload a background image, go into your lesson and double check that it looks great. And most importantly, that it's usable. You may think that the example on the right is exaggeration, but we do get it where instructional designers write all their content and then go, okay, that's done. They just upload any old image to the background of their lesson. and it ruins the whole thing because it's entirely unreadable. So yeah, we have seen quite a lot of lessons like we have on the right. So make sure to read through your lesson after you have uploaded the branding, just to double check that everything's all clear for your learner. And again, this is something where we do have a guide online for what would make a good background image on the Ed Academy. So check that out if you're not super confident in your abilities to brand lessons. Another thing to consider is just keeping images consistent throughout the lesson, the same kind of style. So don't go hopping from stylized imagery for a particular art style to photography. Keep it the same. And also, what I tend to do is entirely avoid PowerPoint style images. The sort of things that you might get if you go into a presentation on leadership skills. As you can see down there, we've got a 3D render, which is kind of low quality, and it's just nowhere near as powerful, in my opinion, as when you use just standard imagery of employees working in the office. Now, I know, for concepts that are kind of harder to get real images of, like leadership characteristics or how to talk to customers, or even time management, I know that it would be challenging. You can't just Google time management and just get an image that isn't a PowerPoint image, because that's what's all that's on there. But when your learners are going through a kind of fun, exciting platform like this, we don't want to be putting them in the mind of boring presentations they might have had. On leadership skills, they go in for an hour, half-hour lunch break, then it's another hour of the same, a PowerPoint full of images like that one in the bottom PowerPoint preview there. It's a bit unsexy and boring. And I basically, if I'm in charge of what's going out, I never let any PowerPoint style images go to production. And I recommend you do the same, because it just makes the lesson look that much nicer. It's really simple. If you're educating on office work or whatever work, just put in smiling office workers talking to each other. It's a nice way to break up the content, and you don't gain enough benefit from these PowerPoint style images of a dude in red pointing. It doesn't give us anything. It just makes the lesson look ugly. So don't do it. Okay, so now we're going to look at interactive questions, just general issues again, stuff that comes up with interactive questions, and we're going to start with poor template usage. And I've got a couple of categories for these. The first I call multiple chat, because I have fun coming up with names like this. So what this is about is when someone uses the chat template as if it were the multiple choice template. So the chat template is really about putting learners in the situation that they, a live situation where a customer's talking to them and they have to select the best response. And sometimes what people do is they put in themselves asking the learner a question, and the learner has to answer the correct answer. And it's a poor usage of the template. Really, if you find yourself putting "we ask" or "someone asks" or something really generic as the question answer in this template, you're probably going wrong. What you want to do is just put it in the multiple choice template. Now, I know I said that we like to keep a variety in the templates used, but this isn't variety. This is still a multiple choice template. It just kind of has a confusing text style skin over the top of it. If it was to make it interesting, what we would do is do something like on the right here, where we have an actual scenario. We're using the chat template effectively, and here it's a nice way to break up the content. It's not just reskin the multiple choice template, it's actually putting them in the scenario where they have to apply themselves. Or you could just switch it to a standard multiple choice template and forget the chat template things. Another problem that we see a lot in our number templates is learners, instructional designers will they won't really touch the increment field. So the increment field is where you can designate how many or the gap between answers. So if the increment was 10, as you can see on the screen here, there's a gap of 10 between each potential answer. So in this scenario where the learner's asked, what percentage do you think sales will increase? And we give them 0 to 100 with an increment of 10. There's effectively 11 different potential answers for this question of 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, etc. percent. Now, if this was a multiple choice template, you would never put in 11 different answers, because the learners, they're going to have such a hard time answering it. It's going to be confusing. It won't be enjoyable to answer, and maybe they get just frustrated and they can't figure it out, and they think, oh, forget it. So keep in mind that what I tend to do is try and make it so that each number template, if I'm using a number template, it only has 4 potential answers. So you can see here on the right, I've set the increment to 20, and I've made the scale only go from 20 to 80%. So what this means is the learner has a much higher chance of actually remembering what they were told if you were doing an interactive reinforcement, or even being able to figure out the answer if you're doing active learning. We can also see on the far right is an example of one of our easier number templates. If you don't want to do maths and figure out things like increment and common factors, that sort of thing, then we've got templates like number, sentence, and dial distribution, which allow you to just write in what numbers you want to appear in the template. So really simple. You don't have to worry about setting up an increment, but you still give your learner that nice and easy template to answer so that they're not battling with the template. The challenge comes from figuring out or remembering the correct answer. So leading on from, I guess, figuring out and remembering the correct answer, what we have here is templates where the answer is really obvious. And again, I see this quite a lot. And perhaps if you've used the chat template or questions like all of the above, I challenge you to go through your content. I promise you, the first chat template you come across, the answer will be the longest answer, because it's so easy to make the answer to the chat template. One where someone's being really positive and saying, "Hey, can I help you? Yeah, that's great, absolutely." And the other one just being something rude like, "I was told yesterday." And okay, we want to tell our learners to be positive and complimentary to our customers, that sort of thing. But again, it's one of those things that's kind of obvious, and we want the challenge in our chat template to be about the thing you're trying to reinforce. Otherwise, every single chat template, all it's reinforcing is be polite to your customers. Again, it's a nice message to send across, but that is not why you're using it in your lesson, I assume. So take the time to create believable incorrect answers to your chat templates. And similarly, I promise you, it's all of the above. It's always all of the above. I never have to read these questions. I select all of the above. I press OK. I've got the right answer. And in your lessons, more than likely, if you've used all of the above, it will be the same. So if you are going to use all of the above as a potential answer to your questions, you need to use it when all of the above is not the right answer as well. So all of the above is kind of symbiotic with its not all of the above partner. Sometimes it needs to be the incorrect answer. So I maybe keep a tally somewhere on your desk of every time you've used all of the above and the answer was correct, that it was all of the above. And try to keep it balanced with the number of times that you have used all of the above as a potential answer and it wasn't the correct answer. So next we're going to look at just some advanced templates. These are ones where I quite often see learners making mistakes, and it's not necessarily poor template usage, it's just that maybe it's a bit of a confusing template to use. So in sentence construct, for those of you who are familiar with it might be a bit not understanding why I've put this as an advanced template, because all you have to do to set it up is write a sentence in, and then the learner has to drag and drop into the text box to put it in the correct order. Now, it's really easy for the instructional designer to use, but it's also very easy to make it confusing for your learner. If you just happen to go through and you just paste in a sentence that you think is important, and it's too long a sentence, the learner's going to look at it and go, "I have no idea," and just throw a couple of words in and give up. Sometimes it's just too easy to make a hard question in this one. And if you're going to use this template, unless you're educating on language, I'd say you really have to think hard about using it. And I would almost say don't use sentence construct unless you are a language education platform, or you have a very short sentence for the learner to put in. And I would definitely say this template is all about being interactive reinforcement, never applied learning, because it's actually quite difficult. If you don't personally know the answer, it's quite difficult to figure out the correct answer, especially if your sentence has the word "and" in it. Typically that means there's no one correct answer. That's another thing. If the sentence could just actually be put in a different order and still be correct, then that's kind of means to your learners to expect them to put the sentence in one correct order. So just be careful if you're using the sentence construct template. Be very careful. Missing word has the same concept. It's one of my favorite templates. I use it all the time, but I see people use it and choose words on either side of an or an and. As you can see in this example, closed questions are those that can be answered with a simple no or yes, or can be answered with a simple yes or no. Both of these work, but Ed will be expecting the content in the correct order. You can't figure out that two potential sentences semantically make sense. It's looking for the sentence that you configured in the authoring tool. So if you're choosing words on the either side of an or, it's difficult for your learner to get right, and they'll be confused if Ed says you got it wrong. It's kind of unfair to them. So don't do that, basically. Sometimes people will put punctuation with the words to try and give the learners a hint. But then what are we educating them on, really? We're educating them that full stops go at the end of the sentence and commas don't, and that's not proper reinforcement. So what you should do, change up the template so that it is not doing that, or use a different template. So you can see on the right here, we've very simply just made the word that's gone missing not the words that are on the side of the yes or no. So if you're using sentences that have or and in them, or similar words, just be careful with what words you make go missing. Make sure that it doesn't make sense to put your sentence in a different form. So categorize. I've seen some very creative uses of the categorize template, and some of them kind of miss the mark. And I want to just show you how it should be configured. And maybe if you're using the categorize template, again, it's a great way to ask a question, really simply to offer that new interaction style where you're dragging and dropping into your lesson, but it can go wrong. So the title field, this is where you just say, which of these two categories does the following item belong in? That's as simple as your question needs to be. You could take what I've written here, take out category A, take out category B, and just paste the whole thing into your lesson. Replace with whichever categories you're talking about, and that's all that title needs to be. You don't need to make it too confusing, but believe me, sometimes people do. The answer field then is the item which is going to be categorized, and then the text categories, those are just the categories. And really, if you keep your template like this, you can't go wrong. You can get creative with the template, but I would recommend not doing that until you're a bit more experienced, or until you know your learners a bit better. Sometimes I see people putting half a statement at the top, half a statement in the answer field, and having true or false as the categories. That just doesn't work. Just have the title of something like, which category does this belong to, true or false, and then the whole statement in the answer field. The answer should always be the item to be categorized. So please keep that in mind. So the strikeout template, again, one where people can go wrong quite a lot. Or this is the one I see people most commonly make mistakes in. And it's fair enough, I've done this too. When you're using the strikeout template, so for those of you who aren't familiar with the template, the learner's presented with a statement. One or two of those words are incorrect in the statement, and they need to manually cross out the incorrect words in that statement. So when you come to this template, so often you're thinking about the incorrect statement that you want the learners to be crossing words out. You start with that, where actually you need to start with the correct statement and work from there. So in the title field, the whole correct statement goes in the title field. You start with the correct statement. Then you decide what words you want to replace in the title field with incorrect words. So for example here, in the sentence, I've chosen the word correct to be the word that gets replaced. So in my word section, I type in the word correct in that field, the word that I want to be replaced. And then in the second area, the incorrect word I want to go on top of the word correct, I type the word correct. So you can see, I think I should have made this example without using incorrect or correct, so I'm saying that word way too much. But you can see on the left here, the sentence that appears is, this sentence about product Ed is incorrect. So what Ed is doing is it's selecting the word correct, and it's replacing it with the word incorrect. And that's appearing in the sentence. The learner would then cross out that word incorrect, and they would see the right answer. So again, when you're setting up strikeout templates, just have a look at this setup, and hopefully this will help guide you in setting up the template correctly. So the final thing with poor template usage and interactive questions is something that I called macro learning. So this is where what happens when you're writing a lesson, writing slide in Ed, and it gets kind of long, particularly in question and answer templates, is that Ed will start just sizing the text down a bit just to get it small so that we can make sure everything fits on screen. So this is really great. If you do have questions that require a lot of content in there, you'll always be confident that they can fit it in. So what you can do here, it really shouldn't be resizing unless it absolutely needs to. You should try to avoid resizing. So what I do, if I see Ed resizing my content for me, I think, okay, I've waffled on too long. I need to cut down on my content. I need to make this a micro lesson again. Make it so that there's only a certain amount of things that my learner needs to read to get through the lesson. So again, if you see Ed resizing text really small like this, try to reword it. Try to reword it so that it doesn't need to be so long. And more often than not, you can reword sentences to keep it nice and small so that even on the smallest screen, the content's displayed normally. And then what you can also do even is use things like if you are setting up a sales scenario, that sort of thing, you can put a slide like this to kind of put your learner in the situation they need to be in, and then ask the question. So this means that you're not taking up all that space on the multiple choice template to write in that scenario. You're just putting the question on there. So what we're going to do is just hop out very quickly, just take a break from the actual presentation slide, and show you how to set up a reviewer. And this is because I'm just going to blast through some common errors that I see, really basic errors that I feel like if someone has gone through and just reviewed the content before publishing it within the app, they would have been able to spot these mistakes. So we're going to go into the user section of the edapp.com. We're going to press create user. I'm going to set create a new user. They're an app user, and call them so we'll create our user down here, and what we want to do is we save the user, and we give them the reviewer permission. So what this means is that when the learner accesses our lesson, or when you log into the app as a reviewer, you're able to see every lesson. As you can see here, even if the course is set to draft, you can go in and you can see it. So you can view content within the app without having to worry about publishing it to your learners, and you can still review it in those draft stages. So I really recommend set your user to review it, log into the app, and just go through each of your lessons once it's done, once you think it's finished, before publishing it or sending it to a colleague to review, that sort of thing, just so you can catch these basic errors. So some of these would be like, you've forgotten to set up a takeaway. Now, I do this all the time too, but every interactive slide needs to have a takeaway. You've misconfigured the template, perhaps you haven't set any correct answers, or if the question has multiple answers potential to be selected and you've only let your learner select one answer, then that's no good. Sometimes you forgot to delete some of that default demo content in the takeaway or that sort of thing, or the answers are influenced by default content. You can see quite a lot in the circle of the answer template. People leave in the "oh, I suppose so" answer, which is a bit odd. Make sure you've created your own custom content for those slides. And then also we can see things like games without descriptions. So we really want to make sure our learners have full descriptions for the games, that they understand what they're interacting with. We don't want the challenge in the game to be figuring out what they are doing. We want the challenge to be actually answering the questions correctly. So we're nearing the end now. So I just want to highlight that and ask you to think of any questions you have. If there's anything I've covered that you would like me to go and actually show you within the authoring tool, any questions, anything at all, that sort of thing, let me know. Otherwise, I will just go through the formatting issues section. So we're just going to cover one or two things that we see where we have formatting problems. So quite a lot of the time, I see kind of poor use of HTML or in the place of Markdown. So Markdown is a very, very common editing standard. It's used throughout the web, and there's even a guide to it. In fact, I will just show you where the guide is, just to make sure that we're all aware of that. So you go in, and when you're editing a lesson, you can see a link down here, and it shows you how to use Markdown. And this is important because quite often I see people using HTML, but it's kind of messed up. They're not closing their tags. They're just throwing in whatever works and then leaving it. And this can create styling issues. You can see on the bottom here a kind of poorly styled list. A p tag to create a line break, whereas on the right we've got a nicely styled list and no Markdown. When I first started, I was using HTML as well, but it just can lead to mistakes where Markdown is so much quicker once you get used to it. So I really recommend, if you're still using HTML in your lessons, just take the time to use Markdown. It's much better, it's much quicker, and there's less prone to mistakes. So also final kind of really picky things that I like to use. When you're using bold italicized text, this doesn't work very well, especially when you're using it in conjunction with bold. And when you're using bold and italics at the same time, it creates kind of ugly content. You want to use either italics or bold to emphasize content, not both. Similarly, when you do things like bold entire sentences, it means that there's no emphasis. When you're using bold, you want to just quickly emphasize one of those key points. So if a learner's scanning through content, they'll kind of see the key points and then carry on. Now, if you've bolded an entire sentence, I get the whole thing is important, so nothing's important. So there's no real thing that the learner can take away from that. Also, I see quite a lot true or false questions ending in question marks, which doesn't make sense. If it's a question, can't be a true statement, and it can't be a false statement either. It's a question, not a statement. So please take question marks off the end of the true or false statements. And also inconsistent use of the key takeaway feature. So in Ed, you can put a key takeaway for your takeaway. This sentence centers the text in the takeaway, makes it slightly larger, but it's kind of used at random sometimes, it feels. Maybe if you have a key message at the end of the lesson, or in particular questions you want to put information in the key takeaway field, but be consistent with how you use it. Sometimes people will put the whole takeaway in the key takeaway area. And again, just like if you're bolding an entire sentence, if the whole takeaway is a key takeaway, it doesn't make any sense. Nothing's key. So that's the end of the webinar. I'm just going to see if anyone had any questions. If not, I will wrap it up there. Say thank you very much for attending. If you have any further questions, I guess outside of the webinar, if you wanted to send me an email about any questions, my email is adam@edapp.com, but you can also send a message to hello@edapp.com, and someone will be sure to get back to you. So again, thank you very much for your attention, and hope to hear from you soon.